Welcome to the Keys podcast, Trust Matters Lessons in Leadership with me, Ellie Potter. In this series, I'll be speaking to multi-academy trust leaders, sector experts, leadership coaches, and more to hear about their journeys in leadership. You'll gain practical tips and advice and get their insights on some of the biggest topics impacting the education sector right now. In this week's episode, we welcome Neil Miley, CEO at Mercia Learning Trust. I'll be asking Neil about his first 100 days as the new CEO of the Trust, including what some of his biggest challenges have been and his advice for other leaders trying to establish themselves in new roles. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to leave us a review or like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome to the podcast, Neil.
Thanks for having me, Ellie. Delighted to be here.
Well, firstly, congratulations on your new role as CEO. Can you tell us a bit about your journey in education that's led you up to this point?
Yeah, of course. I've not been out of education since the age of 5, interestingly. I went straight from school into sixth form, then from sixth form into university. And then when I got to the end of university, I was considering about what to do. And actually, I was considering being an accountant. As a child, I'd always wanted to be a doctor, but there was a couple of issues. Firstly, I went with my dad when he gave blood and realised I got a bit lightheaded at the sight of blood, which wouldn't have been great for a doctor. So at the sight of that point, it's probably not the best career for me. But I, at the end of university, thought about what I wanted to do, and someone recommended teacher training. My dad was a teacher, and he always thought I'd go into teaching, and I was trying to avoid following my father's footsteps. But I thought I'd do another year, went into some schools in Leeds and found out I thoroughly loved working with children. It made a huge difference, found it really fulfilling, really interesting. Every day is different. And yeah, from that point on, I stayed in education, and I started as a teacher in Leeds, did a few years as a maths teacher, and then became an advanced skills teacher. And then in 2010, I joined the Future Leaders programme, which was a programme to accelerate people into headship. And I was placed in a school in Bradford, which was Dixons Allerton. So that was the second school that had joined Dixons Academies Trust at the time. So it opened in 2019, transferred from being Roadsway School into Dixons Allerton. I joined in its second year. And from that period on, I stayed at Dixons for 14 years. So started as assistant head teacher, looking after sixth form, and then teaching and learning, and progressed in Dixons Allerton and became deputy principal. And in 2015, went into a failing free school, which was King Science Academy, which Dixons had rebrokered to Dixons King's Academy. So I stepped in as principal in 2015, worked there for 4 or 5 years, moved from requires improvement to outstanding in a couple of years, and we got into the top 40 schools in the country for progress at secondary. So yeah, it was a great team, really impressive community, great pupils, great family. So that worked really well. And then took on executive leadership role within Dixons and worked alongside the executive team to rebroker into some new schools and open some free schools. And then in 2022-23, became the deputy CEO of Dixons. And at that point, Dixons had 17 academies and were across 4 different cities. So there was a lot of travelling and a lot of support at different schools. But it's a really exciting time in my career. And then I decided that I wanted to look at working and leading my own trust, and the opportunity came up in Sheffield for Mercia Learning Trust, who'd heard about before from a distance and really admired their work, and decided that I would apply, and was successful and started there in June of this year, which has been really great.
And you kept a diary of your first 100 days as CEO. How was that process? Why did you decide to do it? And what are some of those first things, like reflecting on it, that really come to mind that you're like, wow, writing that diary, if I hadn't have done that, I probably wouldn't have reflected or remembered that?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons, really. The first one is when you're stepping into a new role, and it's the first time and probably last time I'm going to ever do this. You want to have something for prosperity when you're a little bit older and to reflect on. But also, CEOs can be a little bit distant from the rest of the organisation, and we have people across our schools in various roles who might look at a CEO and think, what are they doing with all their time, and what do they do to make a difference to our trust and our children? So I decided, actually, by keeping a diary, I was able to share snippets of it on a weekly basis to our staff. So I started not a blog, but a weekly newsletter to the staff. So I'd highlight any activities that I'd partaken in across the week and shared it with them. But it also gave me an opportunity to reflect, especially over the summer holidays, around what had taken place in the first 6 weeks, because I was in a transition period with the outgoing CEO. I mean, it was great of him to give an opportunity for me to transition across while he was still there, and we spent a lot of time in the office together and on different meetings and visits talking about the trust and the history. But it also gave me an opportunity in the summer then to reflect on all the work that we'd done together and all of the things he'd mentioned to me in the areas that he was working on and he wanted to focus on going forward, to then help me start planning for this term ahead. And then I was invited on his podcast, and I thought, well, I'd carry on that diary so I have something to talk about over the period of time speaking to you, Ellie.
Yeah, you're like, I'll bring out the diary.
Yeah, just sort of reflecting over the weekend to see which bits I need to pull into this conversation.
It's interesting that you had the handover with Chris, who was the outgoing CEO. What were some of the things that he told you that maybe you wouldn't have expected to hear? Maybe those pearls of wisdom as an outgoing CEO that he said, this is the sort of thing you should think about that might not have come to mind initially.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real testament to his leadership in the first instance that he was happy to have the new CEO come and sit in his office with him and ask really awkward and impertinent questions all the way through the day, because he was working towards his retirement and thinking, right, I've got 6-7 weeks left. We just want a quiet period, tie up some loose ends and move on, let the new person step into role. But he was really open and honest about what he saw as his vision, the direction of trust and where he'd got it to already. He'd spent a lot of time trying to bring the trust together. There's 7 schools in our trust now, 4 primary schools and 3 secondary schools. And they all have the very distinct characteristics, which is great because that's important for us. We have this view of aligned autonomy where individual schools should retain their own personality, but also align around areas that prevent sub-optimization and ensure that we can share our collective wisdom and intelligence and reduce workload for all our staff. Chris had got to a point where he felt he'd brought the schools together but wasn't in a position to be able to share some of the commonalities out. So his next stage of his journey was around making sure that alignment was a bit more defined and clear for individuals, so everyone knew what they were getting from our trust and everyone knew what they could work in autonomously. So he was really open and honest and talked about some of the difficulties that had occurred during his tenure in post and where he felt he hadn't been as brave in making decisions and pushing things forward as much as he could have done, and where he felt the next 4 or 5 years for the journey of the trust should be. Chris had really strong relationships across Sheffield, which for me, being new into the city, was really important to develop. I'd worked in Bradford, Leeds, Manchester and Liverpool. Never worked in Sheffield, and Chris had been in Sheffield virtually all of his career, so he knew absolutely everybody that needed to be known. So spending time with him and getting him to introduce me to key individuals was really important.
And transitioning from Dixons to Mercia, as you spoke about, cultures are different, and you'd been a part of a culture for 14 years. What were some of those big differences that you immediately saw, and some of the similarities, I guess, as well?
Yeah, I think Dixons, over its 14 years, the culture was always really strong, but there had been changes over that period of time. As you grow from 2 schools to 17 schools, you are going to see some marked differences, especially across multiple regions. But the thing that really strikes me between the 2 trusts is that real focus on high expectations, highly professional staff who are focused on getting the very best for every child in their care. And that's really important to me. And I think that's one of the things that drew me to the trust in the first place from Dixons. There's many times I was approached to look at different roles and had seen various different things, but never felt like the trust that I saw or was approached about was the right fit for me. And that was really important because I wanted to be in a position where I could use the vast experience I gained from all my years at Dixons to help shape another culture in the same way. And at Dixons, culture is seen as the foundations of everything that happened. And that was something that I want to really instill at Mercia, because there are huge similarities, but there are also a lot of differences given the size of scale and the individuals and the way the schools have focused on the idea of aligned autonomy, but there hasn't been a great deal of partnership work amongst the schools, and that's something that needs to develop over the next couple of years, and that's something that I'm going to be focused on instilling, and also giving people an understanding of a shared mission and set of values. I think is important, because Mercia has a mission and set of values, but that's not widely understood and embedded across every single school. Whereas Dixons, if you went into any school and asked what the mission was of the trust, virtually every single member of staff could tell you what that was and what the values were. And that's important to make sure people have that sense of belonging and that identity of a larger organisation making a difference for children.
One of the reasons that people listening might have heard of Dixons is because you implemented before the 9-day working fortnight, which for the sector is pretty groundbreaking, a sector that struggles to do flexible working and do it meaningfully. Could you just touch on that? Because I think it's really interesting to be able to launch something like that. How did that work in practice? And is that something that moving forward you're going to be equally as passionate about introducing in Mercia?
Yeah, I think the one thing about my previous CEO, Luke Sparks, is a real visionary, and his firm belief is if you can't work in the system, you've got to work on the system. And people have been wrestling with the problem of retention of staff and the flexibility for teachers, because you need teachers in front of children. So therefore, 5 days a week, you've got to be in the building. And since the pandemic, there has been a significant shift in people's approach to working. And many individuals who will have previously gone into teaching have now seen that there are other ways of working with a bit more flexibility. And if I'm honest, people don't go into teaching for the money. It's not hugely well paid, but people go into teaching because they can see the fulfillment and the sense of value it brings. And there is a degree of flexibility around holidays and working hours to some degree to help with families or get yourself involved in other areas of your life. But it has become more rigid as a profession compared with other professions more recently. So there needed to be a shift. And whilst there's still need people in the building, if we could come up with a model where people could have a bit more flexibility, not as much as you would do if you could work from home 4 days a week, we wanted to try and see if that would work. So Luke came up with the idea of having a more flexible approach, looking at a 9-day fortnight. And across last year, we worked with our principals who really got behind the idea to try and model some different approaches. So this year, in true Dixon style, the schools are trying it a different way and piloting different approaches. And then through the year, I'm sure they'll come back together again, discuss the advantages and what's worked really well and what needs to be tweaked and come around a single final model, which will be rolled out in 25-26.
And how was the transition after Chris left? Obviously, he did the handover with you. How did you make sure there was continuity so people felt there was a stable environment, but also establish yourself as a new leader with new ideas and new visions?
Yeah, I think that one of the first things for me to do was visiting as many schools as possible, all the schools, and spending some time with staff. And actually, that was one piece of advice Chris gave me at the start, because my original intention in my first 7 weeks was 7 schools to spend 5 days in each school. And Chris advised against it, said you might be spending a bit too much time in each school and people won't want you hanging over their shoulder for 12 hours a day.
Yeah, so he's here again.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Got to be on our best behaviour. Yeah. So he said you might want to take a slightly different approach. So he suggested doing a couple of days in each school and then maybe looping back round at the end again. That worked really well. And in that period of time, I spoke to as many staff as I possibly could do and had some panels and also just catching people on the corridors to find out about the schools and trusts. Because really in those first 7 weeks, it was about listening to what was taking place, what people's fears were, what people's struggles were, what people found were great opportunities and what people wanted to do moving forward. And that then allowed me to start assimilating some ideas about what I wanted to do into the future. Because obviously I came with, again, preconceived ideas of what the trust was going to be like and what I wanted to do based on my experience at Dixons. And that was one of the hardest things, actually. It was trying to get that balance between actually you can go into another organisation and whilst it might not be of the same scale and doing things in a certain way, it doesn't mean what's happening is not the right thing. And you have to...
You change the mindset, I guess.
Yeah, it's still very hard for me not to say at Dixons we used to, and so now I'm slightly moved to it. My previous trust we used to, but
It's
I'm
like
trying.
someone keeps talking about their ex.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
stop bringing in the ex.
You're still talking about them again, are you, Neil? Yeah, okay. I can see people's faces drop when I start saying it. So I'm weaning it out very slowly. But I think it's then using that experience, not dismissing it entirely, because I've got experience of working from 2 schools all the way up to 17, so I've seen that journey, and using that to drive forward ideas for the next year. But the first 7 weeks was certainly just about listening and thinking about actually what we may do. And then over the summer holidays, it was about, right, okay, now we've spent some time listening. What will be the steps we want to do moving into the next term and into the next year, and coming up with a bit of a 2 to 5 year plan rather than just 12 months, knowing that actually we've got a longer journey and I don't want lots of quick fixes. But the change over the summer with the government and the move to eradicating performance-related pay, which we assumed was going to come anyway, actually gave me a really good platform to launch the first change I wanted to make, which was around moving to a more coaching model. Really, the change to coaching is something that's really close to my heart, because my belief is that everybody deserves regular feedback and support so we can get better, and also positives that people are putting into place. A few years ago, read a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott, which is more recently changed to Compassionate Candor. And that is very much about showing that by caring personally and giving constant feedback, people grow and develop. And the government's change to getting rid of performance-related pay and moving towards a approach where everybody is going to just progress up the pay scale allowed us that opportunity to jettison the old approach and move to this new approach where we can constantly give people feedback so they can get better. So I want to make sure that across this year that every single member of staff in our organisation is getting that opportunity to sit down with someone who works with them to give them that feedback so they can grow personally and professionally and get the very best outcomes for our children.
And I guess when you're at the top of the helm, it can be difficult for you to get feedback. People might be scared to give you honest feedback. Where are those places you go to genuinely hear what people think, whether that be in a formal meeting or informal ways, to make sure that you're improving and learning too?
You are right around that, because people are worried about, well, I can't tell the boss that they've done this wrong. But I do actually regularly ask for feedback from the people that I work with directly. So even during our weekly meetings, or we have every so often a bit of a longer meeting, one of the questions I will ask at the end is actually, is there anything that I've missed in your work over the past couple of weeks that you need to make me aware of? Or is there anything that I've done that you weren't happy with? I am still getting a lot of, no, everything's fine at the moment, but I'm hoping that will get better as time goes
builds,
on.
Doesn't it?
And part of building relationships with people is about firstly identifying when you've got something wrong and made a mistake and holding your hands up. It's about vulnerability-based trust. So that's something I am trying to model and instill with others to show that actually I don't get everything right. I make mistakes as well. And if I make a mistake, I'm quite happy to put my hands up and say I've got it wrong. But also, please do come and tell me when I've made a mistake as well, because I'm not going to get better unless you let me know. But I think that is going to take time. In the end, I am 14 weeks now into the role, but the first 7 weeks I was, of course, working with the other CEOs. So really, to be honest, it probably is 7 weeks. So it's going to take time for that to develop and build with people.
And when it came to those first meetings with your direct team, how did you approach those? Did you go in thinking, right, I'm going to get my view across, or am I going to sit back and listen? How did you get the balance right between listening and communicating?
Yeah, someone said to me many, many years ago, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that ratio, which I think is a very good point. Now, I don't always get that balance right, but I am very cognizant that in meetings and when you are in a position like I am in, that if you talk, people are going to basically go with whatever you say to some degree. So I try very hard not to talk in meetings. So I will sit there and listen. So then it sometimes looks like I'm not engaged and I'm not focused at all, but I will usually ask a question or pose a point, but then we'll just sit back and just let everyone else debate and discuss that idea, because otherwise you can quite easily shut meetings down quite quickly by saying, actually, we're going to do this, or I think this, and therefore let's go and do it, because people aren't going to be willing to challenge at this early stage. So getting that balance right is quite tricky at times, because sometimes you can see the direction needs to be travelled. And of course, again, going back to my previous experience, I've seen some pitfalls and mistakes, and I've made loads myself, so you kind of know where you can avoid these. But sometimes people have to go through that journey and go through those errors to come to a better solution. And of course, you can't allow that to happen if it's going to have a damaging impact on children or staff. But if it's something that can be easily managed and developed, then of course you can allow people that opportunity to make the mistakes and move forward. But it is getting that balance, which is difficult.
One of the most integral parts of being a leader is building a team around you who have the expertise to go off and do the bits that you don't have the time or the energy to do yourself. How did you go about getting those people who had been there for years, possibly, and bringing them on side and making sure you knew what their expertise were and putting them in the right places?
Yeah, and that's still going on now, to be fair, because you're constantly evaluating people. It's just human nature, isn't it? Whilst they're constantly evaluating me, you're constantly checking people and working out what their strengths are and what their areas of development are. And leadership, I believe, is about getting the right people on the right seat of the bus so that we can move forward together. And if people want to sit in a different seat, it's about working out how you can give them the skills and the opportunities to make sure they can get into that position. People weren't meeting together as frequently as a team within Mercia Learning Trust when I first joined. People were having lots of one-to-one meetings, but there weren't as many group meetings. So our head teachers now meet together once every half term. We also meet all the wider leadership team of Trust, so head of finance, head of HR and IT, etc. We all meet every fortnight so we can share key messages, because everyone needs to feel like they're part of the organisation. Everyone's voice is equally valued in moving us forward. We then also have a Trust leadership meeting every week, once a week for an hour. So we discuss what's happened in the week and what we're going to do over the coming week, so we can start to build those relationships with each other, because that wasn't happening previously either. So it is now about forming that team and making sure that team is working effectively. But of course, as you just mentioned, make sure everyone's got the right skills and is working in the areas that they have expertise in and are going to make a real difference. And we're still working our way through that. And I'm trying to work out actually what can I pick up and what should I be doing and what can I actually give to someone else to do and monitor and focus on something else. I'm still getting that balance right. I'm unfortunately, as most head teachers are, most people get into my sort of role of control freaks and like to make sure that everything's done in a very specific way, which I'm seeing a few eyebrows raised at the moment when I'm doing things in a certain way. But I think people are getting used to my little foibles and nuances.
And when those eyebrows raise, a lot of that, people are just naturally adverse to change. And it's a big change having a new CEO. How do you get people on side, and what are some of the challenges you think that you come up against when you're trying to make change, when people have been doing the same things in the same way for a long time?
Yeah, the area on that I think's really impressive with Mercia Learning Trust is that the individuals are wanting to keep moving forward. So there hasn't been as much reticence or reluctance to change at the moment as you might have expected. The ideas that are being presented have not just come off the back of a fag packet of my thoughts over the weekend. They have been shared with smaller groups of individuals first to try and develop them into more formed ideas before they've gone out to the wider group. And I'm trying to get as many voices as possible around any ideas that people feel part of the process and the solution. The biggest changes that we're looking to make are around development for individuals, and therefore people are quite invested in that because they want to get better. But the other area we are looking at also is the approach to aligned autonomy. As I mentioned before, there hasn't been as much of a overview of what's aligned. This idea of aligned autonomy at the moment is two words in our trust, and people are very much focused on the autonomy rather than which bits can be aligned. So we are going to spend the next couple of years looking at how we can get a bit more alignment around our trust. But that is not going to be an overnight solution, and it's going to involve as many voices as possible. And I predict there are going to be certain points where there are going to be a few road bumps that we're going to have to overcome, a few hurdles. But we'll do that in collaboration with people and by communicating with people and making sure everyone understands the journey that we're on. I firmly believe that if you give people a strong rationale and you constantly communicate with people why you want to do it and what the impact's going to be for them, and more importantly, for the children in our organisation, people invariably get on board.
Yeah. When you talk about communication, what would you say your personal communication style has been? Obviously, you've learned from being a teacher, assistant head teacher, and all the other roles you've done. What have you come to learn as the way that works best for you? And I guess, does that change depending on who you're speaking to within the organisation?
As a mathematician, communication is maybe not always my strongest point. And I like to communicate in bullet points or clear instructions. This is step 1, this is step 5, and you're going to fill the other ones in between. So I've had to learn to take things a little bit slower and give a lot more detail around what we want to do going forward and use different mediums for communicating. So I do like having meetings with people, either one-to-one or in small groups. But then also we spent some time developing a system of communicating more widely across our trust to reach as many people as possible. So as I mentioned before about the diary, that then formed into a weekly newsletter, which is going out to all of our staff. And it's read by, I'd say, over 50%, which is allowing me to communicate what direction we're going in. And I can keep putting in subtle reminders about where we are changing and why we're changing, because ultimately my view is that once you have generated an idea in your own head, you've probably spent a lot of time thinking about it, thinking about all the pitfalls, thinking about all the hurdles that you need to overcome, and you can usually synthesize 20 hours of thought down into a 2-minute overview. But when you're communicating that to other people, you need to realise that the other people haven't gone through that 20 hours of thought and thinking about all the pitfalls. So you need to over-communicate as frequently as possible. So I am taking the view of that I need to say things 20 times or 30 times until they actually sink in with people.
Yeah.
And whilst it might seem boring to me because I've said this already and I've thought about it for 20 hours and now I've got to say it 30 times, actually for other people it's the first time they're hearing it. So I need to keep saying it again and again and again, and over a bit of time you get the osmosis effect and things just drip feed into people's consciousness. So that's the approach that we're taking at the moment. It seems to, at this very early stage, seems to be working, but maybe we need to come back in a year's time and see where we're up to.
So when you spoke about some of the biggest challenges around autonomy and the trust working together, what are some of the other biggest challenges that you can see already after being in the trust for only 14 weeks that you want to try and change and make differences to?
Well, there's the bigger challenges on our sector, such as the challenges around send, and we've talked about staffing already. But within our trust, it is about getting that balance right between growth for growth's sake and also having a bigger impact on children, because ultimately I've come into this profession and I hope everyone that I'm working with has come into this profession to benefit children and communities and have a lasting impact on our society that's positive. And at the moment, we are working with 7 schools in the southwest of Sheffield, and those schools are doing really well. But there are other schools in the local area that are maybe not performing at the same level for no fault of their own. It's just they've got different challenges. And one of the things I'm trying to do is within Sheffield is to open our doors a little bit more and give more opportunity to people to come and visit and work out what we're doing and find out and get more support. And this isn't about empire building. I'm very clear, and I've been clear with our staff from the start. I haven't come into this role because I want to run 20 schools or 30 schools. I would rather run 7 exceptional schools rather than 20, 30 mediocre schools. But I do want us to be able to support and influence other individuals through our actions. And if we're doing something that's working really well and benefiting children, and other people want to get exposure to it or get access to those resources, then I'm more than happy to share, because if we can then benefit a wider group of children that aren't even within our own trust, then that for me is doing a great job. So getting that balance right across Sheffield is another challenge, really, because I think there's quite a lot of trust in Sheffield. There hasn't always been that level of collaboration, because I think there's a bit of a fear about, well, people want to take each other over or people want to run our schools, which isn't the case, really. I think it's about us all working collaboratively to benefit the community.
And when you think about big sector challenges, there's some really big headlines at the moment. Obviously, we've got Ofsted, send, attendance, behaviour. Thinking on those 4 angles and starting as a new CEO, is there any one of those in particular that you have a focus on, or ideas or initiatives for how you want to change and develop that in your trust?
Yeah, so I think send is one of the biggest ones at the moment for me. And this is a challenge that is not going away and actually increasing. And if I'm honest, there's probably a bit of overlap between send and attendance, and send and behaviour is quite a significant overlap. So if we can crack the send issue, we're going to actually influence quite a lot of the other areas as well. So our trust has recently just opened 3 specialist resource provisions. Within Sheffield, children were being taxied who had send needs from one side of the city to the other side of the city to go to special schools. And we know that there's a limited number of special schools in every region in the city, and they are really struggling as well. And the previous CEO and I both agreed that actually it isn't fair that you've got your most vulnerable children sitting in a taxi for maybe an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening, going to the other side of the city, where if we could find a space in our schools, we could run the provisions and you could have local children going to school with their peers, with their family, and getting the support they need in school. So we've opened these 3 specialist resource provisions, 1 secondary, 2 primary. We already had an existing integrated resource in our schools, and we're trying to use that as a model of showing how we can develop a sector-leading approach of how we can address some of the send issues within Sheffield initially, and hopefully other schools and other cities might look at this, see this is a model that could work, and mean that we are working again on the system rather than in the system to make a lasting change. So that's one of the biggest areas for me. Ofsted, when I first joined our trust, it was something that the schools were focusing on quite significantly. And my view is that we don't run schools for Ofsted, we run schools for children. And if you're doing the right thing for children day in, day out, and you've got the right long-term vision about where you want to go to for your school, it shouldn't be focused around the Ofsted framework, because Ofsted framework changes quite frequently. If we're doing the right thing for children, Ofsted will recognise that when they come into the building, and that will make a big shift. And that's been quite a mindset shift for our head teachers, because they've been very much focused on Ofsted, so their action plans are all focused around Ofsted. Their everything, when they talk to me about what they were doing, is all Ofsted driven, where I was very clear about, we're not doing this for Ofsted. And we're doing this because the children in our care deserve the very best. And if you do everything right for the children, whenever the inspectors team comes into the school, they're going to see that difference. Because the biggest problem, in my view, at the moment with the framework is, as much as you can tweak the framework, it is always reliant on the individual that comes through the door. And whilst they're doing a lot of them doing an amazing job and they're trying to apply the framework consistently, when you put humans into any situation,
it becomes subjective, doesn't it?
There's always going to be a level of objectivity in any situation. That's not through the fault of the Ofsted inspection team or the way that it works. That is just going to happen. That is human nature. So if you try and second guess that, you aren't always going to do the right thing for the children. So it has to be focused children first. Let's get that right. And then let's think about Ofsted when we get the call or anything happens afterwards. And I think there's been some positive shifts in Ofsted over the past few months. And hopefully we'll see a significant change over the next year.
What's your view on the report card? Do you think something like that would work if that comes into place?
Yeah, I think that's a very challenging area to work on, because whatever you put on that report card, people are going to try and link it back to the grading system. If you look at the shift on GCSEs to 1 to 9, all people talk about is, well, that's an A star.
That's
and
equivalent.
That's a bit, So there's going to be a few years of that. So it is a challenge, but I think it is the right direction to go in. I think it is going to take some of the fear away from schools. I've even seen the shift recently to moving to a 9:30 Monday morning call. The change in our heads from 12 o'clock for the rest of the week is significant, because as a head teacher, whilst I can tell them as much as I want that don't focus on Ofsted, obviously that's their professional reputation, that's all the work they put into place. They're waiting for a team to come in and judge that. And you're always going to feel that weight on your shoulders. So the report card and the removal entirely of any grade descriptors, I think, will make another step forward, another difference. But it is still in pilot and in development, so we'll have to wait to see what it actually looks like at the end. But hopefully we'll see a positive shift forward again.
And for people listening who might think, we'd love to move away from an Ofsted driven mindset, but we find it difficult because that's how we're judged by the community, where children want to, well, not children go, but where parents want to send their children. What would you say to them to try and move away from that mindset where it's like, this is the reputation of our school. This is the reputation of me as a head teacher, as me as a teacher.
You can't get away from that. Again, I think people need to realise that if you are doing the right thing day in, day out, that Ofsted will look after itself. I do think that there's not a huge number of parents who pay a lot of credence to Ofsted. I think if it's really negative, I think they will do. I think if it's really positive, they will do. When it's in between, I don't think there's a great understanding, if I'm brutally honest. Even thinking about my own family, when I speak to my brother and talk about local schools to him and talk about Ofsted, he's not overly, and he's a very intelligent man, but he's not overly clued up on it. I think he's just quite happy that it's relatively close to his house and that his children are happy in school, and that's what's most important for him. Obviously, if you get in outstanding across multiple areas, that is a great bonus for your school. But a lot of schools are in that position already very oversubscribed and doing very well. Parents recognise that before they get the Ofsted judgment.
When you think about growth as a trust, scaling can come with its own issues, doing it too quickly, not doing it quick enough. What's your balance when you're looking into the future of how you're going to get that right?
Yeah, you have to have the systems and structures set up first before growing and making sure that you are confident that the systems are scalable. You also have to have enough resource available, because ultimately in the current climate, when you are growing, invariably you are usually taking on schools that have faced challenges in the past and are looking to get additional support, and you need to have that support available to make sure those schools have the best start and the children are supported as well as they can be. But the way our system works at the moment, it is a chicken and egg situation, because you need to have the staff available to provide that additional resource. But the way that budgets are at the moment, you can't have 25 people sitting on the bench waiting to get placed or parachuted into a school to provide additional support. So it's making sure that that growth strategy is clear and being honest with yourself about actually what can you do and who can you support, because nothing worse than taking on a school that's facing challenges already, not being able to provide that support and actually making the situation worse.
Yeah.
That's no good for the children. And also thinking about the children within your own trust already. If you grow, is there going to be a significant impact on those children and those staff? Because if that impact is going to be negative on the children and staff in your own trust already, then maybe it shouldn't happen. And you've got to get that balance right. But there is a necessity to make sure that you are clear about what your improvement package and support is going to be for any school that you're going to take on, and being open and honest with the school at the start about saying, actually, this is what we're going to offer. This is what we think you need. Do we agree? And therefore, can we work together to make sure that this is successful for yourselves and for ourselves?
And you mentioned earlier about your 2 to 5 year strategy. We don't have a crystal ball, but in 5 years' time, what would you like to look back and reflect on and think, these are the things I achieved?
Yeah, well, first I'd like to make sure I've still got a job in 5 years' time. That would be a starting point.
You're still in post.
That's one measurement of success for me. Am I still employed? I think in 5 years' time, I would like our trust to be more collegiate than it is now, so working greater in partnership and making sure that all of our schools are at the level of our very best, because within our trust at the moment, we've got some schools that are amongst the best in the country, and we've got some schools that are doing really well, but they do need more support to get there. So it's about making sure that all our children get the very best, because I was having a conversation with someone in our team yesterday and saying, actually, our first step is to make sure that every child is getting the very best education in our own trust before we look at anything else. Because if we can't say that a child at school X is getting the equivalent education to a child at school Y, then we're the ones who can make that change. As CEO within trust, I'm the one who's got the agency to be able to make that shift. So in 5 years' time, I would like to make sure that we are amongst the very best trusts in the country. That's not just for academic outcomes. Obviously, that is a huge indication. That's very important. But also making sure that our children are happy, that they feel well supported, that they're going on to be successful in the future, that we have a really stable workforce and the staff are happy and staff enjoy coming to work and have a sense of purpose, sense of belonging, and a sense that they're making a real difference to our communities. And if we can achieve that in 5 years, I feel like I've done a really good job. And also having more of a impact on the wider Sheffield community.
And in 5 years, what would you like people to say about you as a leader? Some of the qualities that they might have seen or reported back on?
Yeah, I hope people say that he listened. I think that's important to me. I think one person cannot make a huge change by themselves. Obviously, as I just said, I've got the agency to shift things forward, but I can't have every single idea either. And one thing that's very important to me is listening to others and thinking about that diverse set of thinking that comes from other people's lived experiences and using that to shape the way forward. So I don't want to be seen as a authoritarian leader who's just dictated everything we're going to do all the time, but someone who's actually thought about what is going to have the biggest impact, how can we shape that together, and how we're going to work together to make the biggest difference. And it's not always about being liked. Obviously, I appreciate that you've got to make some decisions because it's the right thing to do for the children, and you're not going to please everyone in an organisation. That's not possible. But I would like to be someone that is respected for the decisions that I've made and for the difference and the change that I've made to the children in our trust, but also to the staff as well.
And reflecting on the last 14 weeks, if someone's listening now and thinks, in the next year or 2 years, I'd like to become a CEO, they might be working at that C-suite level in a different role. What would your advice be from learning from first-hand experience 14 weeks in? What are those things that come to mind that think these are the things that you might not know, that you should know, and these are the things maybe I wish I knew or I've learned now?
Yeah, I think for me, I was very eager at the start. Even though I told myself not to do this, I told myself, don't say yes to everything, don't say yes to everything. It was just saying yes to absolutely everything. I'm not talking about decisions, but yes, I'll be involved in that, and yes, I'll look at that, or yes, I'll go and talk to this person. And when I've looked back at the diary and thought about the 100 days, sometimes I've looked back at some weeks, and whilst I've been exceptionally busy during that period of time, I've actually gone, well, actually, what's been the impact of those 5 days of work? What's the difference that I've made to children within our trust and to the staff within our trust and to our local communities? So it's about being, I think, selfish with your time to some degree, because you feel like you've got to be everything to everyone all the time when you're in this role. And having an understanding that sometimes you need to do certain things that no one else may see, but overall it's going to have a lasting impact on individuals. So making sure that you are able to say no to certain things because you know it's the right thing to do and don't think people are going to be offended, because ultimately at the start of this journey, everyone's thinking, well, new CEO, I need to go and impress him, so I'm going to invite him to this and ask him to do that. And conversely, you're feeling exactly the same thing. I better say yes to this and I better say yes to that. And actually getting that balance right about making sure that you use your time effectively to have impact was important. The other part I would say is about making sure that you go and speak to people before you take on the posts and think about other people in your sphere that you can have a conversation with that will be able to give you insights about potentially your behaviours and things that you might need to address when you start, but also get an opportunity to go and speak to other CEOs and finding out actually about what they experience and how they are a couple of years into their journey and their tenure, and finding out what they feel they should have addressed or looked at for the start. The final thing I would say on that is no matter how much research and paper activity you can do looking at an organisation, until you are in the seat and having open, honest conversations with people and listening, you can't actually work out what's going on. Because while anyone can look amazing from the outside, when you go and speak to staff on the ground and find out actually what does happen here, that's when you get the true insight about what's happening.
And you speak about getting the balance right within the role. Obviously, work-life balance as well in such a demanding role, I can imagine is hard to get right. What are some of the things you've learned over your time as being a leader at trying to get the work-life balance in a way that works for you and your family and your life outside of schools, which might seem like there isn't?
I think when my wife listens to this, she'll say there is no work-life balance, Neil. You just work all the time. But no, it is important because you can make yourself ill. I found if you're working too hard, and life goes very quickly. My eldest daughter's 13 now, my youngest is 10, and that seems to have flown by in an instant. And it is finding time for them and for family to make sure you're getting that balance right. Because if you don't look after yourself, you can't look after other people. So it's working out opportunities to cut off at certain times and do things. So I have tried to more recently build in time at least one day at the weekend I'm not doing anything, and then also finding some time to make sure that you are having valuable time with your family.
we like to finish the podcast with a quick fire round of 4 questions. Okay. So question number 1, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the education sector right now?
The rising trend and the lack of funding to support. Because everyone wants to do the very best for their children in their care. And it can be wrenching as a leader when you're speaking to senior leaders and head teachers in schools, and they are really struggling to deal with the level of need coming through, especially in early years. And that's really where I feel the current government, and they're making the right signs, need to send the additional funding, because we need to get as much support in when children are younger. So by the time they get to primary school or secondary school, they have had the level of support they need to be successful. Because at the moment, I think we're in a situation where we are trying to cure too late. And I think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, if I've got that saying right. And that's I think that's the way round. We need to make sure we get that balance.
The second question, what motivates you on your difficult days?
It's trying to spend time with the children. Because one of the things that you find as you get higher up in education is, I came into the role, I said earlier, because I love working with children, and the further you go up, the less time you spend with children, unfortunately. So it's finding opportunities to get into schools and just be around at lunch and break time and talk to children, because no matter which role you're in schools, children are really inquisitive, and they'll come and have a conversation with you.
They don't mind that you're the big boss. They'll ask you anything.
They couldn't care less. They do whatever they want in front of me as well. But that's the best thing about children, because they really are so, they lack, not airs and graces wouldn't be the way that I would phrase it, but it's just their ability to be able to just get along with everybody and ask questions is one of the best things about working with children. So that is the way that if I'm having a really hard day, I'll try and get into a school and spend some time, especially in primary schools. If you go and sit and have lunch with the children at primary school,
lovely.
It's delightful, because they'll just have the most random conversations with you about us. But
you think
really
you have random questions in the middle of the night when you wake up, but then nothing on the questions that kids can come out with.
Unbelievable, it's fantastic.
Question number 3, what has been your proudest achievement in your career so far?
Oh, wow. Yeah, what is my proudest achievement? I think it has been working at Dixons and seeing that growth from 2 academies up to 17. I was very fortunate. I've worked with some great leaders. I mean, Sir Nick Weller, for example, who was Luke's predecessor, Shelley Watson, Wes Davis. They were a fantastic team together. And Sir Nick especially gave me so much opportunity to grow and to develop, and gave me various different experiences that I wouldn't have probably gotten in other trusts. And that experience and that level of support and trust that Nick gave me allowed me to help, I think, develop one of the best trusts in the country in Dixons. And that's been really proud of seeing that growth from 2 academies up to 17, and seeing how successful Dixons have been in that period of time. And I like to think that I've played a small part in achieving that. So it wouldn't be one single thing. I think it's the ability to reach, it's 15,000 pupils nearly in Dixons now. So it's a huge reach across 17 academies. So that's been I think my proudest time.
And the final question, what are you most looking forward to this academic year? Your first one as CEO.
Yeah, well, I think I'm really looking forward to seeing some change within Mercia Learning Trust and feeling a part of something really special, moving the trust forward and thinking about how we can develop systems and structures that will hopefully be lasting into the future. Because ultimately, I think the biggest sign of a good leader is someone, if they're not there, things still run without them there. So you want to make sure that the systems that you're putting in place and supporting with have a legacy and longevity to them. So that's what I'm really looking forward to at the start of this year, because it is an exciting time to be within the trust. We're at a position now where there is opportunity really to develop something really exciting for the future, and there's such strength in the staffing across the schools that I feel like we could be one of the sector leading trusts in the country, and it'd be great to be a part of that journey.
Well, you're at the start of a very exciting journey. Hopefully, I look forward to see where it goes. But thank you so much for coming on today, Neil. It's been so good to have a chat with you.
Good. Thank you, Ellie, for inviting me. It's been lovely speaking to you too.
Thank you for listening, and thank you very much to Neil for joining us today. To find out more about how The Key can support your trust, please visit thekeysupport.com/trust. For more information about Neil, links to relevant resources and information on how to subscribe to the Trust Matters monthly newsletter, head to the description below. If you enjoyed this episode, please do like and subscribe or leave us a review.